for Wednesday, October the 27th, 2021. Old business minutes of the October 20th meeting. I get a motion.
I move approval.
Or second.
And it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the last meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any corrections? Okay, thank you. Motion passes. And under old business, the homeless crisis response system continuum of care. Do I understand that is Kate with us today? And
Yes,
I
she
am, yes,
is.
Chair.
okay, thank you.
So this is just a follow-up, I believe, from last week's council time at the request of council to bring this information forward. I believe it's been conveyed to Kate Bed to do an overview of what process they went through and then really focus on the recommendations for council's conversation today.
Okay, thank you. Kate, take it away.
Sure. Good morning, Chair and County Council members. Thank you for having me. As Ms. Otto mentioned, what I have done is I have unearthed a presentation from 3 years ago regarding a proposal at that point to reorganize the continuum of care structure. And so I'm going to be walking through that just to help share what that proposal looked like, and then just provide some discussion points at the end from the perspective of the Council for the Homeless. I'm Kate Budd. I serve as the Executive Director with the Council for the Homeless. We are a nonprofit agency here in Clark County, and you're welcome to advance the slide. We were created in 1989 from the incredible foresight of the city, the county, and the housing authority, recognizing even then that homelessness was a challenge in our community. Our mission is to prevent and end homelessness, and we do that through advocacy solutions, which refer to our many direct service programs and coordination efforts among many of the providers here in Clark County, and then also through leadership efforts. And you can go to the next slide. So among our leadership efforts, we serve as the Continuum of Care Collaborative Applicant. And that's a formal term by HUD that identifies a lead agency that provides staffing support to continuums of care, which are regional bodies that are established across the nation. Some are just countywide, some encompass many different counties, others just chop up counties. And ours just happens to be Clark County and includes the city of Vancouver. A part of being the collaborative applicant means that we complete and submit a pretty arduous application every year to HUD to help them understand what our local homeless crisis response system looks like, and more importantly, what it is that we're doing to move their required system performance measurements, which are basically outcomes, forward within the community. Next slide. So here are more specific details regarding what a continuum of care is. And it was created to be a regional planning body that coordinates housing and services for folks who are experiencing homelessness. It oversees the systems that deliver housing and services with a focus on ending homelessness and working to prevent those folks from returning back into homelessness after they move into permanent housing. The continuums of care are very much required to follow all of the very specific HUD definitions, as well as many requirements of the McKinney-Vento Act at the federal level. We are also tasked to track and to manage, these are HUD's words, those who are homeless in our area. And we do that primarily through the Homeless Management Information System, which is a database that is used by all of the publicly funded housing program providers in the community, as well as many of the private providers as well. We're also required to do the point in time count, which is a one night count of all the folks that are living outside or in emergency shelters or transitional living facilities, to understand how many folks are without a home on one specific night. We do have a point in time count that's coming up the last Thursday of January. And so we look forward to just working to coordinate that and then sharing the numbers with our community once they're available. Next slide. So I mentioned that Continuum of Care application. And one of the purposes of that application is to apply for HUD dollars. And we have the opportunity this year to apply for about $2.2 million that specifically support programs that move people from homelessness to housing. The majority of our dollars that are being applied for are for ongoing permanent supported housing programs, which serve people who have the very highest needs in our community. And so we want to make sure that we continue to get those dollars so that folks who are in those programs can continue to stay permanently housed and well supported. We receive funding for 65 specific units for people with high needs, as well as for the Homeless Management Information System locally. A few of the details that the application looks at specifically this year within our homeless crisis response system is outreach and how are we as a community reaching all the folks that are experiencing homelessness and working to engage them within the system to get on a path for emergency shelter or longer term housing programs. How are we partnering with early childhood education providers as well as school districts and childcare providers? How are we partnering with public housing authorities? And locally, we are very fortunate to have a very collaborative housing authority. And then it looks at an extraordinary amount of data from that HMIS system, really looking at how are we moving people from unsheltered situations into housing. How many types of programs do we have once someone gets into a program? How are they exiting? Are they exiting positively in that they're able to remain in their housing and not move back to homelessness? Or are they exiting negatively? And so we need to work to continue to strengthen those programs because we never want someone to move into permanent housing and then have to move back out into homelessness. Next slide. So the following slides are literally from the presentation 3 years ago and just detail this reorganizational proposed structure for the continuum of care. This is a summary regarding how that reorganization proposal came about. Back in November of 2017, the Community Foundation of Southwest Washington convened a group of the funders and key collaborators related to our homeless crisis response system. They came together under the facilitation of a private entity that was supported by the Community Foundation of Southwest Washington. And they conversed first about the then planned day center, and then moved to talking about how they could create a more collaborative and informed group where elected officials were engaged and they were able to make some system level adjustments and learn more about our homeless crisis response system. Next slide. Through those conversations, A reorganizational structure was created. It was agreed upon that it would follow the Homeless Crisis Response System Homeless Action Plan, which Clark County Council adopted back in November of 2018. This plan is still active today and continues to move forward. And the key focus of this action plan is reducing the number of people that are experiencing homelessness here in Clark County. This plan does end in 2022, and so that presents another opportunity to create an updated action plan. Next slide. So 3 years ago, there were structural challenges related to our current continuum of care. A few of them being that currently the governing body of our continuum of care, which we call the steering committee, does not have any elected officials on it. It's made up of a number of different folks from many different sectors, and I'll share more specifically what those seats look like, but no elected officials at this point. And it also creates challenges with coordinations of other systems of care. We recognize that there are more opportunities to collaborate with behavioral health entities, for example, or physical health entities. And when the focus is really on the crisis response system, that can be challenging. There are 3 bullets on the bottom that have strike-throughs, and those are there because they're from the proposal 3 years ago, but they're no longer applicable at this point, being that there are no longer elected officials on the Council for the Homeless Board. There are now a few groups that engage people with lived experience of homelessness within the continuum of care. And we have now memorialized the required seats per HUD on our Continuum of Care Steering Committee. Next slide. So this is a description of the seats that are represented on our Continuum of Care Steering Committee. As you can see, it's a diverse array of folks who represent different sectors within our community. We have 2 people who represent seats for people with lived experience of homelessness, and other folks on the committee who also identify as having lived experience of homelessness. And I will share that there are people who represent more than one of these seats. And so in total, there are 18 people on the steering committee. So the next slide. This is a representation of our current continuum of care structure on the left. And I certainly don't expect you to understand it, but just want to share that it's a robust array of many different committees and work groups that engage folks from throughout the community. It has continued to grow since we started talking about a continuum of care reorganization in 2018, and also includes a system improvement partnership group, which engages folks with lived experience of homelessness, as well as from a diverse groups within the community. So represents by and for agencies. It represents LGBTQ entities, disability advocates, as well as folks who are living with substance use challenges. On the right is the proposed new structure, and the primary change is that there would be a joint executive board on homelessness that would oversee that robust continuum of care, and that they could potentially also create a community advisory forum which would elevate the voices of people with lived experience of homelessness. The idea being that the Continuum of Care Steering Committee would recommend potential system changes to the Joint Executive Board on Homelessness, and also be able to provide feedback and perspectives to the Joint Executive Board if they were thinking through a new program or system change, etc. Next slide. So from 3 years ago, this is what the Joint Executive Board table would look like based on the proposal. It would include 7 individuals, 2 from City of Vancouver, Clark County, and the Vancouver Housing Authority, 1 from the Council for the Homeless. At this point, each of these entities provide direct services to people who are experiencing homelessness and also manage funding streams that are supporting programs for people who are experiencing homelessness. 3 years ago, the Community Foundation was interested in being an advisory member, and certainly be worth checking in with them to see if they would like to continue to serve in that role or a different one. Next slide. So a few of the restructuring opportunities that I haven't touched on include just collective learning and conversations between the different entities and the work that they're doing with their different funding sources, as well as with system change. It could memorialize that community advisory forum, which could be a value add to our community and elevate the voices of those with lived experience of homelessness. And it also does align with other particularly larger communities across the nation that are creating these collective bodies that oversee the full continuum of care. Next slide. So this is that visual that illustrates what the continuum of care could look like with the proposed reorganization. The key change, again, just being that this Joint Executive Board on Homelessness would exist and would oversee the continuum of care and the varied groups. The Council for the Homeless would continue to serve as that backbone agency, or more specifically through that HUD definition, that collaborative applicant. Next slide. And I believe I just already touched on those, just regarding the strengths of that Joint Executive Board. Definitely, again, bringing together the partners that provide funding and services within our system. And you can go ahead 2 slides. So the Continuum of Care Steering Committee is incredibly important. That would be something that we want to keep as a community to make sure that those $2 million continue to flow in, and that if this new structure were to be put in place, it would allow the steering committee to narrow their focus to the continuum of care requirements. Right now, the focus is broader on our entire homeless crisis response system. And that then just provides, a large breadth of needs and programs to oversee and to focus on, which certainly means only a number of changes can occur during a 1-year period, for example. And so by adding on the Joint Executive Board, it could potentially increase the overall system change work and creation of new or changed programs that could be put in place within our community. And forward 2 slides. just more specifically regarding that community advisory forum, which was a part of the proposal, is that it would engage folks with lived experience of homelessness and those from diverse communities. The focus was that it would be more of an ad hoc type forum where if the Joint Executive Board and/or the Continuous Care Steering Committee was proposing something new or different, that they would look to this group to provide feedback, as well as to engage the feedback of our greater community and then provide that to the entity that was seeking the support. Two more. Thank you. And so just regarding the reorganizational strengths, was that it provided an opportunity for elected officials and high-level administrators to be at the same table, to discuss priorities and funding at a broader level related to the homeless system, allowing the Continuum of Care Steering Committee to focus more narrowly on the HUD requirements of moving people out of homelessness. It would have memorialized that community engagement forum, creating a vehicle for folks with lived experience to share their feedback, and would create a system oversight group that would be common across the country. Seattle, for example, has one that was just recently changed and is receiving positive regard. And then lastly, 3 years ago, there was a joint board memorandum of agreement and charter that had been vetted in numerous ways. And that, of course, then would be something to work with if you were to move this forward in the present year. Next slide. So just a few discussion points that the Council for the Homeless would like to share. I do believe that there's an opportunity to bring all the key funders together in more of an informal conversation with an external facilitator, just to really help one another understand what the priorities are for any type of a joint group and what key outcomes might be that could be worked upon. And then also just to help build trust and realize a few successes together to help strengthen efforts moving forward. This discussion regarding the Continuum of Care reorganization happened very quickly. And so the current Continuum of Care Steering Committee hasn't had a chance to just be briefed on this proposal and their feelings regarding moving it forward. And so there would be efforts to converse with them and help them understand what it is that this reorganization would look like. And then lastly, just updating the memorandum of agreement and charter, knowing that there's a number of things that have changed in the past 3 years since the previous proposal was put in place. And then the final slide just again illustrates the current Continuum of Care structure and what the proposed structure from 3 years ago would look like. All those bubbles underneath the current structure would be represented with the green bubbles in the new structure. The major change being there would be a joint executive board on the tip top of the Continuum of Care. Any questions?
I had a question, Kate, and it's back on slide number 20. One of the things that you indicated was that Seattle has a new setup, and how long and what does that joint group look like, and how long has it been in effect? I don't know if you know the answers to that, but you mentioned Seattle as one of the areas that had done something different here with the setup. So
Sure. So they have a new structure, and what I understand is that includes a number of elected officials from both King County and many of the cities within the county itself. It's a regional structure that includes a CEO or executive director, as well as numerous staff underneath that role. I know in Seattle that they actually brought all the different funding sources that support the homeless crisis response system in with this new structure. And that is certainly ambitious. It was years of planning that's led to this. And now they are about less than a year in to moving that new structure forward.
And you said that there had been kind of positive results from that. You think, just generally looking at this, that it has had some success, and so there was kind of I felt like you were saying that there was some success, or that others had restructured and were seeing fruitful results, I guess.
Sure.
You
So
would-
with Seattle, it's I think it's too new to identify if there are positive successes from it. It is certainly well regarded in that the entities involved felt like it was a collaborative effort, and that there were numerous discussions that involved many of the key entities and folks with lived experience of homelessness that helped them get to where they are today. And so folks feel very invested in this new entity and are hopeful. Portland also, for example, has a joint group, and we also know that Houston, for example, has a joint group. They tend to look different in every community, but the commonality is that the prime funders within the community are coming to the table and discussing what the overall system looks like and what outcomes they're working to move toward.
Okay, thank you for that.
And Cheryl, Brian, just let me add to that, because I've been following that model too. So they just
Thank you.
hired their executive director. He's just hired his staff. He reports to that board, and he is in the process of drafting his plan. So he's been out trying to assess what's been going on. I believe in 2022 is when the county and the city of Seattle plan to move their funding to that new organization. And so he would be in charge of all of the homeless funding coming from the city of Seattle and King County. And he works very closely with the Seattle Foundation as well, because they are a major funder as well as out there. So Kate's right, it is very new. And so everybody's watching to see how that is going to go. And if they can actually kind of pull that off, because I don't believe there's any other part of Washington doing a similar, like a structure like that. So.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So they have just hired an executive director. So yeah, it is new, but we should watch it. So that's good. Thank you. Other questions or comments?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Mann.
Okay. Thank you once again, Kate, for all that you have been doing and all this work that led to this presentation 3 years ago and continuing to today. One of the questions I do have, and maybe it relates to the steering committee structure, but what we're confronted with today in Clark County is the realization that a number of our encampments are located in Department of Transportation right-of-ways. So no matter what we do, and if we succeed in putting together a standard operating procedure on how we address encampments among all the care providers in the county, we need to include a representative or participation by the Washington State Department of Transportation. And for that matter, perhaps the ports, as their homeless situation becomes more prominent as well. Where is the plug-in? Is it on the steering committee? Where do you envision the best place for a representative from our Department of Transportation to sit so they can participate in all our prioritization of fundings and where we address our resources? Where do you see that they should be best plugged in?
I think with the Joint Executive Board on Homelessness, there could be opportunities to have non-voting members that are part of that committee who are very important in relation to the outcomes that the group is working to progress. And then we also have a WSDOT representative who is engaging with our coordinated outreach work group, recognizing that those outreach teams are very much engaging with the same folks that WSDOT is in the encampments throughout the community. And so having them there at the table to strategize related to, when they might be going out to encampment, and to also make sure that WSDOT is aware of the resources and whom they can contact when something's happening is really important. So we've appreciated their willingness to engage in that way already.
Thank you.
Questions? Okay, I don't hear any other questions. Thank you, Kate, for reminding us again, what was presented in 2017. And, there were members of the council that were not here then. So this is very helpful. And hopefully we have an understanding of this. I don't know if there are any other comments by either Councilor Medigi or Bowerman on the suggested changes at this point, or whether you want to discuss that at a later time.
So I'm happy to at least give you my thoughts. This has so much merit, and I don't believe it was 2017. I think it was 2019 that it was actually presented to us, and there are some changes, but I really like the structure that was proposed on the joint executive, the 7 members, and maybe adding in a few non-voting members with WSDOT. I'd like to put this in place and get this going as soon as possible. There's too much effort that's now in parallel instead of focused under an executive board. And that was the main failure of between Vancouver and the county, is that there is still too much happening in parallel by the city without communication whatsoever with staff or even the executive board. And I think it needs to be led by a professional director. And with the membership as proposed by the city and county, at some point we really do need to include at least a rotating member from the smaller cities. Battleground had weighed in; they wanted to participate right away. They all have issues throughout the county, unfortunately, and so that's a needed position too, I think. I guess I do have one further question of Kate, because you had lined through those with lived experience. Where are they represented in this new structure?
So in the new structure, if kind of all things were left alone, they would be represented in the System Improvement Partnership as well as the Continuum of Care Steering Committee. And then as the entities are thinking about the new structure, the Community Advisory Forum was proposed. And so that would be the primary opportunity for folks with lived experience to be engaged and to be able to provide feedback.
So the steering committee, and where was the second location? I missed that.
Sure, the System Improvement Partnership meeting that exists today.
Thank you. So if we do have at least our council a majority wanting to move forward, I really would like to see some rapid advancement of this program for reform that had so much work put into it just a couple years ago.
Madam Chair,
Councilor Brown?
you know, it's a very interesting challenge to make this work efficiently and really effectively together. The reason being that on the subject of homelessness, there are so many entities involved, not just meaning different jurisdictions involved, but different entities providing different kinds of services. And they truly all need to be coordinated. And one of the problems that I think we need to be cognizant of as we talk with the city to try to figure out what is the best way to go forward between the county and the city in a coordinated way is which entities should be at what table. And if we're not careful, it gets to be too complex and too complicated, and it becomes a method of talking rather than of really being coordinated for doing. And so I hope that as we communicate with the city, we're able to look at, Kate, what you've presented so effectively today, and sit back and say, is this really the simplest, best, and most efficient way to go forward to where we can really be accountable for making the kind of progress that the county and the city both need, cities all need to have made. And that is a really tall order, but it starts with, I think, good communication of the entities involved. And I don't see the path right now for making that happen, but I think that's what we need to work on next. We've got such incredibly competent staff right here. It's just a matter of pulling it together to make it happen in a way that I can't help but use the word coordinated. For example, a steering committee of 18 is huge. And then we talk about adding additional members that need to be added. Yikes. That makes for a really big body. And any of you who have worked with bodies that large, we all know how difficult it is to really communicate with each other and get things done. So anyway, those are some of my cautions, I guess, as we figure out together how we're going to move forward.
Councilor Barr, I just want to kind of respond to you. I completely agree, but that large body exists now. And so
Yeah, I
Kate
understand.
and her staff, staff that so they can get everybody around the table to get everybody on the same page and in the same direction about what we need to do. And so they can have their input and some buy-in and what needs to happen with the strategies that are part of the homeless action plan. So, I mean, I think that's very key to happen, because if you don't have people at the table, they either don't are involved or they go off in their own direction. So that really is about the subject matter experts coming together who actually have some involvement with direct services to the homeless. So that would be different than what this executive body. I agree with you. That executive needs to keep small and tight, because they really should be focusing on policy and system issues. But let the folks who are subject matter get into the roll up their sleeves and get that work done, because when they finish talking, they need to go back to their organizations and do what they need to do to help end and eliminate some homelessness in our community.
May I ask a question of Vanessa?
Go ahead.
As we move forward and figure out the best way to make this happen in a coordinated way, what would you see as the relationship of that large body, currently called that steering committee, maybe to become larger relative to the other coordinating groups that are talked about. And some are in place, maybe some not in place the way we've talked about them now. But what is their relationship to each other from your perspective in this, in a more ideal world?
I mean, I think if everything worked perfectly, and it doesn't, because it's all dictated by funding sources and requirements that come down for each of the different areas, we would have. I mean, there's a lot of bubbles on those charts that Kate said, and again, they're dictated by funding. If we really just kind of focused on our community and system-wide issues, you would probably have a core, in my mind, have a core group of folks who actually do the work, who have a lot of the capacity to implement some of these initiatives. And these other people would come in and out as needed to probably try to help improve when there is a particular issue that needs to be targeted. If people don't see what their role is and you keep bringing them around the table, they don't say that engage. And that may be one way to control it. We did that around healthcare reform. We were the first in the state to do that, and we implemented early adopter integrated Medicaid, and that's what we did. We had started off with a big group, and then we realized that was too big, and so we narrowed in, and then we brought in people as we needed to bring in, and we used pilots to really try to implement things before we took them to scale. And we kept our elected officials engaged and elected. And I actually had an elected official that came out of Skamania County who was the leader for me when I needed to work, because I kind of was the champion and the leader and facilitator for that. He helped me to Commissioner Braun, Chris Braun, helped me to deal with the legislature and all the other electeds to try to figure out what we need to do in this community. And I mean, so we've done that in our community. I think with homelessness, it's just you have a lot of people who care about it and they kind of have their own strategies. And so you have strategies in the faith base, you have strategies with the cities, you have the strategies with the homeless action plan, you have, did the state has some with the schools and everything, just figuring out how do we do a common core plan and then figuring out who are those core players and bring them in as we need it. It's harder said than done, but we can do it because we did it around healthcare reform. It's just, everybody has to have the buy-in and want to come to the table. That's the key, is do you want to come to the table and address this jointly?
Madam Chair, I want to respond back to Karen.
Okay, thank
you. So I want to just focus on this executive leadership, the small group. I mean, when I was in the Council for the Homeless, when we had representation from the city and the county, that was a good model. We had a director, we had a council for the homeless, we had a number of the relevant stakeholders. But what was wrong was we really were focusing on too broad of subjects. And a lot of it had to do with fundraising, which really wasn't an issue for the elected policy decision makers to sit in and guide. And then what we're missing now is, whoever the director is, the Kate Budds of the world, haven't been coming to our policy direction between Vancouver and the county. So we kind of took what was almost a good structure before, then we removed the Council for the Homeless, which should have been the center of gravity and the professional direct leadership together with our staff, Vanessa and Michael. And we kind of threw that to the side. So I'd like to return to this hybrid model where the Council for the Homeless is there, whoever the director is, or a professional director, and then join it with our policy guidance, the electeds from the council of the city and the county, and then have relevant non-voting members as part of that small policy guidance. And then I think we're almost there. Once we have that nucleus, and it's a small one, to infuse not only the professional director, but the policy guidance. So I like the structure that you've teed up, Kate. I think we just need to move it forward with Vanessa's input and with the city's input. I did recently meet with the mayor to talk about some of these issues, and I think she's listening right now. I'm hoping she is. We need everyone to weigh in, but I think we have a structure that is ready for prime time.
Madam Chair.
Council Olson.
Kate, you had, I don't know who's managing the slides, but there was a slide up there that had some sort of bullet points and some steps, I think, that you had asked us to maybe consider. Could we bring that back up real quick?
The second to last slide. One more.
Slide 21.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, it sounds like there's going to be enough interest on the council to consider at least moving forward in some direction. And I think this slide in particular, because I don't think we can do all this today. Just all nod our heads and say, let's move forward. So it seems to me that we would want to look at some sort of process and steps as we sorry about the puppy, as we look potentially making these changes. Hang on a second, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. But that we actually we work on some process steps, and we do it in a maybe in a real deliberate and collaborative way, because we don't have anybody else here at the table today except us and the Council for the Homeless. So we're also considering other people that we want at the table. So I think just maybe a more deliberate process rather than trying to do it all today.
I saw Councilor Medvedev nodding his head. Is that right? Do you have a comment, Councilor Medvedev? Go ahead.
No, I agree. We definitely need to include the city and the professional staffers from both the city and our county. I'm trying to urge that we have a pragmatic step forward. And I know Lindsay's on board and Vanessa's on board. I don't think it would take much to achieve some of these next steps in smaller. One of the things we were missing with what we had is that the staffs from the respective jurisdictions just weren't getting together enough to iron out some of these details. So I'm hoping that in this discussion, we do exactly that, which I think is what Julie was just really referring to. We can't do it all right now. I didn't expect it to. I just want to kind of dust this off. And Kate, if you could throw in, are we close on an SOP as far as addressing encampments for all entities to kind of look at? Where are we at on that process?
We are. We hit a bit of a snag in that WashDOT is asking for anyone who steps foot in a WashDOT property where campsite is be vaccinated. And so we're working through that.
Okay.
So can I just be clear so we know the
Yes.
next steps? So I think
Vanessa,
what Kate is recommending, and I guess that's what we need direction is she's asking the council to say, if you want to do this, we probably should look for an external mediator to bring these partners together, the city, the county, housing authority, Council for the Homeless, Community Foundation, the original group, to talk through identify the key outcomes. There probably needs to be some building trust and communication amongst that group, because staff will follow. But we need the group to kind of determine, what are you asking us to do? What is your goals? And where's the direction? And then it looks like the facilitator or Kate would have a conversation with the steering committee to make sure, the COC steering committee, to make sure they understand this is the process, get their feedback in there. And then if that is what these everybody that's talked above want to do, then it's time to update an MOA, because the old MOA is outdated. So you need to update that in the charter, and it goes back in front of these bodies for approval, because that was the process before. Everybody bought into it and signed on to the MOA, and then you can kind of start that meeting. I think that's what Kate is recommending happen if this is where the council wants to go.
So I'm not clear that we need an outside mediator. Maybe we do at this point. And I think the last bullet is the goal, to dust that off, get it rewritten, And then certainly the Council for the Homeless should work on its own steering committee buy-in. I'm looking for the most direct way. Do we really need an outside mediator?
I think, excuse me, Council, let me address what Vanessa and Kate have said, if I may. I think what you proposed, Vanessa, is a perfect second step. Let's get a first step in place that gets on paper using what Kate just presented to us, the discussion that we would like to have with that larger group. And yes, I do think that when the larger group of the city, the county, the providers, the staff get together, that we do need to have a mediator, as was done before. And the foundation has again expressed a willingness to work with us to help come up with the ideal person, hopefully, to fill that role. But I'd like to see us get something on paper first to discuss, and that would be working from what Kate presented to us today, but including what you said, Vanessa, because that was, I think, terrific as what needs to be on paper that we start from when we talk.
Actually, that suggestion sounds good. Who are we tasking to put together this first written proposal? I would ask Councillor Medvegi and Bowerman what you would say. Who would you like to task with that?
How about 2 from the city, 2 from the county elected group, and that would probably be those who have been serving on the JAG, along with 2 staff from the city and 2 staff from the county. That's just for discussion, but that would be a cross-section group that would get us going on paper.
Chair?
Okay. Councillor Lentz.
Yeah, I have a question about that. So I think in a moment I may have a question for Councillor Bowerman, but at the moment I just want to say that as far as the direction to move with this, I really appreciated Vanessa's framing of next steps. And I would also agree with Councillor Bowerman and with the slide in front of us that an external mediator would be a very good choice. But I think what I was seeing and hearing in the next steps description of this conversation to get parties around the table and identify key common outcomes, try to engage in some trust building. I feel like my interpretation of what that conversation would be that sort of framing of what are we looking to get out of this? What do we want in the agreement? What do we want it to be? And the question I think I have then, Councillor Bowerman, is I feel like what you just framed out as far as a couple from the city, a couple from the county getting together to talk about what we're looking for sounds very similar. So I'm reading that as you're asking for a step 1 that I was seeing as very similar to what you're saying would be step 2. And so it's a question without a hard question, but I guess what are you envisioning as different from in these first steps that would be different from that conversation with the mediator, with the larger group?
I may have gotten a bit lost in there, but let me give it a try. I think that smaller group that I was talking about would be the one to get something on paper for the group with the mediator, the larger group, to talk about. I'm not sure that larger group that involves the key funders that are listed here on the slide before us, for example, should start only with what was. I'd like to see Vanessa's input included in what is looked at on paper, because she had such good perspective, I think, there. And I'd like to see that included too. Does that make sense?
Your question?
It kind of does, and I'm not so worked up about it that I'm gonna toggle those details too much. But I guess I would recommend, especially given the current status of the JEG, and if you're looking at having the same members who've been a part of that, try to have this conversation as well, given the problems that have been outlined in communication within that group. I would probably, as you know, if I were looking at this from the outside, would recommend maybe starting with a mediator to begin with, and perhaps if you're looking at having all of these groups, really the only additions to the conversation from here would be this community foundation, housing authority, and the city. So not a terribly large group, but starting that conversation with everybody at the table to frame desired outcomes, to make sure that everyone is starting on the same page. I think one of the problems that we have been seeing is that when entities have different outcome desires and goals, to begin with, then there's probably not going to be a lot of room for heading down the same path together if it's not dealt with at the beginning of setting down those shared outcomes. So that would be my recommendation, but I'm certainly not going to quibble with doing some paperwork in advance. I would just say perhaps if that, depending on how that goes, maybe jump into that larger desired outcomes conversation a little more quickly.
I would say, if I could just interject here, I would agree that, you know, there seems to be some communication problems at this point, and it might be helpful to have a mediator if that isn't and maybe that mediator or that mediator is more necessary with a larger group. If I understand it right, and Councilor Bowerman, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds to me like what Councilor Bowerman as a first step is suggesting is more sort of parameters or borders placed around what it is trying to be achieved here. Is that right? Do I understand that right, Councilor Bowerman?
Yes, I guess I'm just someone who likes to start a discussion that involves a great number of people around important and diverse issues with something on paper. And so the purpose of that first group would be to get on paper what would be discussed.
Enter.
You don't necessarily have to actually buy into this. They're just buying the idea of discussing it.
That's
and
right.
and so that might be a good idea. Councilor Olson, you were going to say something?
Yeah, please, thank you. So I just kind of want to take a step back. I think, Councilor Ballmer, I think what you're saying is fine. I have no issue with it. But I'm wondering if we just take one more step back. Chair, you asked about sort of who we would task with kind of putting forward the process that we're going to undertake. And I guess immediately what came to my mind was that would be maybe Kate and Vanessa working together to outline the steps and the process that we're going to go through. And then we would have this discussion with the stakeholders with regard to what that might look like in terms of what Councilor Bowerman was suggesting. So I guess I was thinking maybe we just take one more step back and have a clear process that that maybe Kate and Vanessa put together, just as a thought.
I agree 100% with that, and I would maybe volunteer Lindsay. I think she's still on board as a core group. I mean, we already have in writing all this work that the Council for the Homeless already generated. But so I think Councilor Olson, I agree with that next step.
I agree too, that it would, those individuals would be great to get this started and maybe get something on, or at least prepare to get something on paper.
So if I could just understand the assignment, because I agree with that, because I really believe that I don't know if we're ready to put something on paper real clear with outcomes. I mean, I think there needs to be some conversation and some clear understanding of where everybody's coming from. So I agree. It should be me, Kate, if Lindsay could help, and we can invite, contact the city and see if they have a staff person who would like to participate. And it's really identifying the process that encompass these next steps that would be kind of that first meeting. And we can reach out to the community foundation and see if they can help with a external mediator, somebody who's neutral, who can facilitate so everybody could participate. That's the importance of a mediator, is a facilitator, so everybody can participate. So I think that's clear. Kate, is that clear? I think that's a clearer process that might be some for us to get started with.
It is, yes, glad to partner.
Vanessa, you mentioned having a process. I would add a structure, because I think what that structure is going to determine a lot of what follows. So include that too, if you would.
What does a structure mean? Can you just define what a structure?
Who are the players who are at the table in the various discussion groups that we have to talk about homelessness? Is there a JAG? Is there a steering committee? Is there a group over all of the different bubbles that Kate had? And, you know, what is the structure, so that, again, Kate can put together a chart with her bubbles in the relationship that they really have to each other, and who's on them.
So you're proposing that be a starting conversation point, because I think the city may want to talk about the JEG, which is a different process. So, and I want to make sure we start from the baseline so everybody can have their voices heard. And I think if they feel like we bring something to the table, that might already start off the bat with eroding trust. So that's why I was saying have a conversation and let people decide, yes, we like this if it does this, and then we can move forward. Does that make sense, Council Bowerman?
Oh, it does. Okay, so tell me what you mean by process.
Process is kind of like we did before. It's just saying, okay, the purpose of this is to focus on the homeless system in our county. We can have some clear goals that we have to meet. And here are the key players that we're asking to participate in that meeting. We've asked for a facilitator, identify who that facilitator would be. We would talk about hopefully some proposed timelines, so say, here's when we want to talk about a meeting and kind of what the end goal would be. And there's just a draft of some process so that when people come together, and it could be totally changed by the members, but it is just a way to start the conversation. It is not proposing any particular structure where someone says, see, you already have something in mind, you're not listening. It's just a way to get started.
Actually, Vanessa, I think we're saying the same thing, because we're talking about who's going to be at the table for what. Yep.
Okay.
That sounds good to me too. And so it's good to define terms. And I do think that, the defined term of what Vanessa has set out here as far as a process is great, because I think it does open this up for other input and trust to begin with. I would agree that it might actually have some red flags if you start identifying bubbles. So, so that if that is agreeable to the council, if we've got a clear path forward and it's understood, without objection, we will ask Vanessa, Kate, Lindsay, and perhaps a staff person from the city to join in on this first group. Does that sound right?
Without the perhaps, yes.
Yes. Okay. Without the, all right. Yes, that's right. We need a person,
I would
a
note,
staff person from the city. That's
we can
right.
reach out to the staff for the city. It's my understanding, my counterpart, it's my understanding that at this point, the city is hoping to have the JEG meeting in November with all present. So that staff person at the city is going to have to follow the direction of their council. So can outreach and do that. I just want you to be aware of what is being conveyed to me in terms of what kind of response we may get initially. So would definitely encourage the continued elected to elected conversations. I think it's great that Councilor Medveggie met with the mayor. I think that's going to help. Staff can do what we can do, but those elected to elected conversations are going to be really key. So would encourage you to continue to do that.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Okay, once again, thank you all for your participation in this discussion. It's been very helpful. And I do think that we have a great path moving forward. So onward and forward.
Okay, thanks so much, Kate
Mhm.
and Vanessa, obviously.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on then to new business and the third corridor discussion. I think that we have a new draft, but I think there are could be some amendments to this new draft based upon some other information that we got from the RTC director.
Madam Chair, there is one thing that is very good about posting ahead of time so that there is the opportunity for informed input ahead of time. And that we received. And based on that input, I would like to suggest to the draft resolution that was provided to us a little bit of change, just a tiny bit of change. And then perhaps we could discuss the entirety of it after that so that we have that amendment right up front. If you've got that resolution before you, on line 16, it would simply read this way. Infrastructure, comma, studied added transportation capacity from additional bridge and on. Okay. And then, shall I slow down? Infrastructure, comma, studied added transportation capacity. And then on the page 2, line 37, to add after the word area, including tie-in with County GMA Comprehensive Plan Update. I'll repeat that. Adding after the word area, including tie-in with County GMA Comprehensive Plan Update. So a part of the reason for that, if I may just say, is that the coordination of discussion of a third corridor certainly needs to be integrated with other planning efforts that are going on. But the mention of the County GMA Comprehensive Plan had not been made explicit either now or apparently in the past. Back in 2008 with the RTC visioning study. So the effort is to make that explicit so that there's no question but that it is included. So that would be the change, and I won't comment further unless you wish.
Okay, well, are there, if people took down what was stated there, are there any comments or questions with regard to that?
I have no objection to those small changes.
Okay.
Chair?
Councilor Lentz?
Yeah, I'm trying to process a couple of changes. I think the first one, trying to figure out what I'm saying. I think that there may be a difference in understanding of the word corridor between the 2008 study and this resolution and how we're using it. I believe that the change of adding studied added transportation capacity from additional bridge corridors doesn't actually capture. I think it's better. I appreciate it, and this is an attempt to try to continue to refine. That study wasn't so much for the purpose of addressing added transportation capacity from additional bridge corridors. It was added capacity for Clark County, and corridors in there and in that study and in the maps that were within it were much more about cross-county transportation and corridors within Clark County to manage the movement of people within it. And there were potential linkages shown, but the study was much more about how to move within Clark County than how to move in and out of Clark County. It's all related, of course, but I feel that studied the need for added transportation capacity from additional bridge corridors doesn't quite accurately portray what the study was trying to do. And in the note that we got from Matt Ransom, he also, let me bring that up. I have two different screens up here. He explicitly said that additional planning would have to be done to evaluate the need and location for candidate corridors. I feel that it would not be accurate to posit that the 2008 study said, here is where the bridges should be and why, and we're ready to go. And that's the impression that I'm getting from this current draft.
May I ask, whatever gives you that impression, we need to remove that, because that is not the feeling at all. The feeling is that it needs to be updated at this point in time. There were maps made of the additional corridors that would be logical back then. The point being that they were logical back then in order to accommodate additional population growth. But exactly what they're to be now might be different. There's been housing developed, there's been roads developed, there are just many changes since 2008. Agreed.
Yeah. May I respond? I know we're doing more of a back and forth than we often do, but I really appreciate this conversation, and I am working in good faith to try to get us to something that we can move forward with. I agree with what you just said about a lot has changed, in the 13 years. Oh my gosh, how can it be 13 years since 2008? Since that was done. The finding, so I had a conversation with Matt Ransom to try to better understand that 2008 study. And one of the things that he said was, for the purposes of doing it, they talked about just what if Clark County is at 1 million people? How are we going to move people at 1 million population? And it didn't necessarily account for, tying into GMA and our comprehensive plan. And further, you're absolutely right that a lot of development has happened. The findings of that 2008 study were never incorporated by any of the jurisdictions relevant to it. So yeah, in some of the places where they said there should be roads in Clark County, there are now subdivisions, among other things. What gave me the impression that we're saying that study says we're all good to go was in section 2 of the whereases on page 2, where it just says we should begin to work expeditiously, construct a 3rd bridge, and begin planning for a 4th bridge corridor. The impression that I get from that is, let's go do it. And there's so much more study and work that needs to be done, that I appreciate you saying that. And I feel like this this current draft is not quite so equivocal.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Olson.
I just actually, I was going to bring up the same, and that statement is made in the first section as well on line 5. It says, make meaningful steps toward construction of a 3rd bridge and planning for a 4th bridge corridor. It seems to me, and then that's repeated again in section 2 on page 2, that we're in a pre-planning for a corridor stage right now. We're nowhere near constructing a bridge phase right now. So I think maybe just changing that more toward planning rather than constructing would be helpful for me. And then, maybe thoughts about the necessity to actually reference the 2008 RTC visioning study. I mean, I think we're all in agreement that long-term planning for bridge corridors is a critical discussion that we should have. And if that's not the study that leads us to having that corridor bridge discussion, I don't know that we need to reference it per se, but that we as a council want to make a statement about planning for additional corridors for bridge crossings. So just some thoughts there, but specifically in line 5 and section 2 on page 2 in terms of building a third bridge. I think we could massage that language a little bit.
So if I hear you right, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Councilor Bowerman.
I was just going to say, are you saying, Councilor Olson, for line 5, encouraging all parties to make meaningful steps toward planning the construction of a third bridge?
Yeah, I would, yes, similar, making meaningful steps toward planning of corridors for a third and fourth bridge, something like that. So we're moving toward planning for those corridors rather than planning for construction, because we have to have a corridor. And we don't even have that right now.
Okay. Other suggestions or comments?
Yeah, so I think broadening it with a few words is a good idea. We're not engineers, and we don't know what Oregon's going to agree to ultimately, but I think as a political body, we should speak up. And I appreciate Matt's comments. They're all right. And I've met with Matt, and, years ago on the RTC, he actually, at my request, presented this visioning study to the RTC to kind of tee it up again. All of this planning needs to occur, and it shouldn't exclude tunnels, ferries, other instrumentalities of transportation in other corridors. One of the points I made with Mr. Johnson, who's working on the bridge, and I said it would really help him in the public narrative, one, if Oregon wasn't talking about all this tolling at the same time they're talking about building a bridge, but also if there was real planning going on by Oregon and Clark County, the state and federal government on additional corridors, because that would satisfy a great portion of the public who is concerned about construction today and what is congestion today. What has really changed over the years is the population's grown and congestion's gotten worse. Matt's point that the visioning study was looking at a population of 1 million. When I first read that study a couple of years ago, it's like, why did they pick that number? It was somewhat arbitrary and capricious. We know what the congestion issues are today, and it is only going to get worse. It has gotten worse. All of the modeling by the RTC shows it will get worse, and it has gotten worse. So as a political body, I would like to just, if we can add a few words that we can all agree to expand it, not to eliminate other instrumentalities in other corridors. I'm all for making this public statement, because we do need to do the real planning to identify where those corridors will be, where they make most sense for both Oregon and Clark County, where the rights of way need to be acquired. Otherwise, if we haven't lost the opportunity already, we are quickly losing the opportunity to build this without massive destruction to communities. And that's the example of the Cross Bronx Expressway I've given many times to show how poor planning occurs when no planning is in place, and they just bulldoze down neighborhoods in order to build a new corridor. So I think this is really close. I don't object to adding a few words like Councilor Olson suggests, and certainly what Matt has sent us by email is all 100% correct. We need to get this process going in detail.
So I have a comment and then a question for Councilor Bowerman, because she's the one that brought this forward. I comment on the what Councilor Lentz said about other jurisdictions not joining in the planning or whatever. Actually, by adding the comprehensive plan, asking our planning department to add this to the comprehensive plan, that comprehensive plan goes to other cities. So I think that adding that is an important component. And actually that is what Matt Ransom suggested as well. I think that we do need to put some meat into this by adding that. And I have been told over and over when this discussion comes up in RTC, for instance, that or even with our own transportation staff, it has to start with somebody. It has to start with some jurisdiction, and this is the way to start it. This is where the corridor is going to be. Clark County is where we are, and we're the legislative body for the county. And hopefully by bringing this up and making this statement, we will be joined by some other cities, and our planning department can also begin some work on it. So, Councilor Baumann, my question to you is, do you object to removing the word construction and replacing it with planning? Not planning construction, but just replacing the word construction with planning.
We're talking about line 5.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I would like to see us move toward the planning of the construction of a third bridge, knowing that the third and the fourth are sequential, but that's my preference. You want to take out the word construction, that's what the majority would like. I can certainly live with that. I think we're going in the right direction as a whole.
Are there other comments by the council? I actually think that planning is putting the horse before the cart. And so maybe using the word planning in this particular resolution would be our best first step forward. But I would, take the advice of other council members. If I really think that there has to be a corridor before we plan a bridge. So our plan to construct a bridge. So,
Madam Chair.
Chair, okay.
Councilor.
Okay, yes, sorry. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So maybe something, getting to Councilor Mevichi's points about maybe not just talking about a bridge, but talking about transportation corridors. Maybe something to the effect that parties make meaningful steps toward planning a third and fourth corridor, Columbia River corridor, or something like that. Just to use the word crossing, or to use the word rather than even using the word bridge for that matter. But that's not my holdup. But I think maybe more toward steps toward planning a third and fourth bridge corridor.
I think that's
fine. Want to take out the word bridge.
Chair?
Oh, hang on just 1 second. Mine was muted, and I was going to call on Councilor Bowerman there a second, because your comment to that, Councilor Bowerman, was?
It would be meaningful steps toward planning of a third and fourth bridge corridor, is what you said, right? I think that's fine. That it's consistent with what the chair was saying a moment ago. It's moving us forward, and that's what I want to see us do as a body. So good.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Lentz.
Thank you. I also support switching to planning instead of construction, and I think these are good changes. I'm thinking about the interrelation with growth plan and working in all of the planning. Chair, I agree that first, that planning before the construction is definitely horse before the cart, and we want to move in that direction. It's a lot easier. Um, I'm trying to figure out how to frame this. Getting all of the parties to the table to start talking about the need and locations of additional corridors is an excellent role for Clark County to take the lead on. A moment ago, Chair, you'd said that, because we're Clark County, this does make sense for us to do it. And I agree with that. One of the things that we will come up against with the locations that have been talked about for the places where different corridors could be is that in some of them we don't have jurisdiction because they're in cities. So this definitely is a multi-jurisdictional conversation, not just about where the crossings would go, but how we travel through the county. And then we do start to get more into our jurisdiction, especially in the unincorporated areas, and how we do this. I am a little concerned that other jurisdictions might read this. It's not worded as a demand, but I'm worried that it might be read as a bit more of a demand than an invitation to the table. And so what I'm trying to articulate and think while I speak, and that's one or the other is usually the only thing I can do, is that I'd love to see this not just say, please begin planning for this, but instead, please join us in this conversation to begin this planning. I think that a great role for Clark County to play here is the one that we have been hearing we need to play, is this larger land use conversation. So I don't know that we would achieve the results we were looking for if we simply said, start planning, but instead tried to actually facilitate that conversation getting going. Where I would see that playing into this resolution would be on the second page in section 2, where we're talking about the planning. I think that tying it into management plans does make sense, but rather than just requesting planning commence, something that I don't have the words for this second, but about requesting parties, participate and come to the table with us to have this conversation and get this going. Because I agree, if it's going to start, it needs to start. But I wouldn't want it to be seen as Clark County saying, okay, now you all go do this.
So line 5 of the resolution presently reads, and encouraging all parties to make meaningful steps. I think those are the words you're looking for, and it's right in the opening paragraph.
And I would say that too. I just really believe that we're not making a demand. I mean, the county is responsible for the comprehensive plan and updating it. Then they send their draft to the cities, and the cities make their comments. So I just don't. I think Councilor Midvidge is right, because we are encouraging all parties to make meaningful. And then we're just adding that we want this as a part of the Growth Management Act comprehensive plan updates. And that's the only way we're going to get it done. It's Clark County that does the update. Mm-hmm. The city. They comment after Clark County has done it. So and this is come one, come all, but Clark County is going to lead the way. And so I
guess what I'm trying to articulate then is, if Clark County is going to lead the way, then we should start by asking people to participate, not telling them to.
It looks like we did in the first section.
Madam Chair.
Second too.
Councilor Robson. Thanks. I mean, maybe just, it could be as simple as in section 2, just adding and invites other Clark County jurisdictions or other participating jurisdictions to join us in something like that. I mean, just could be a very simple little addition of. So
what line would you place
on
that?
line 35? The council requests planning to commit. I'm trying to think here. Sorry, I'm doing the same thinking out loud. maybe the council invites neighboring jurisdictions to join with us and commence planning to add additional bridge corridors. Councilor Lennis, does that meet with your sort of direction or no?
That's the direction I'm trying to go. And I was just looking back at Matt's email, and I think he has some wording that perhaps could help. I'm sort of, it's a different context, so I'm kind of editing as I talk. But we invite all parties to begin planning discussions to integrate long-term planning into a more unified GMA planning discussion. And we could add like 4 additional corridors or something like that. But just, there's so much work and conversation that has to happen before we can get to where should these corridors be and how do we get there. And we can't do it in a vacuum. We can't do it as just Clark County saying what we think. And I think that the leadership move here would be for Clark County to formally, if we're making this a formal statement, to formally set that table.
Madam Chair.
Eventually, we're
Councilor
going to run
Baumann.
out. This is going to be a never-ending meeting.
With what the content of what you're saying as far as the purpose, I do concur with that. Not fond of the word invite, however, because I don't think that that's particularly strong enough. What it says here is that currently, you mentioned line 35, to this end, council requests planning commence. Maybe you want to say with all parties involved or something like that. But I think we need something a little more definitive than we invite everyone to the table. Just a little bit stronger, I'd like to see. So maybe you could add to on line 35 to that sentence, council requests planning with all involved parties commence or something like that. I don't know.
Or jurisdictions.
Gets to that with, yes, that gets to that.
That's, I think we'd name it jurisdictions. So planning commence with all jurisdictions to add additional bridge corridors to all comprehensive plans and relevant Clark County long-term transportation plans in the metropolitan area, including tying in to the county GMA. Actually, I see the and comprehensive plan update. We're mentioning the comprehensive plan twice here, but I do believe that if
It's okay.
not an update,
Mhm.
fine. It gives further instruction. Does that meet with some of what we're trying to achieve here by including other jurisdictions? And it is, in a sense, an invitation. We're requesting. And so that's an invitation. Is that
I agree.
okay?
I agree with all those changes. It follows the introductory paragraph. Section 2 is a perfect place to expand it. So I agree with those changes.
Are we okay with that?
You bet.
Yeah. Okay. So shall we have another, are we making a decision on this today? Was that the purpose of this, or is this going to be a resolution at a hearing?
Does it require a hearing?
Do we have an answer on that?
There's no requirement for a public hearing for a resolution. Most resolutions, though, that the council do consider are on a Tuesday council meeting under separate business. But it does not it doesn't exclude you from doing it at this meeting.
We could so we could go ahead and move for this resolution at this meeting as amended, correct?
That
I
is
would
correct.
so move. I enjoyed all the discussion and the amendments. I think they're all good ones, and I'd move that we approve it with those changes we've discussed. Hopefully Lindsay or someone has captured them all accurately.
I have.
Thank you, Karen.
Would you like to second that, Councilor Bowerman?
Absolutely. I second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded to pass the resolution 2021. We don't have a number, but we could get a number for this declaring this third corridor resolution with the amendments as stated and discussion. Is there further discussion?
Yes, I have a question of Kathleen. You had said that it would be usual for the resolution to come then to a Tuesday meeting. So how about that with regard to this resolution?
Madam Chair, I would support that, Councilor Bowerman. I think just generally, I think we should do less of this at council time, but that's my opinion. But if you want to make a statement on a corridor and you want it to be meaningful and impactful, I think a Tuesday regular meeting is a better place to do it rather than council time kind of on the fly. So.
Okay, so do we want to take back or
Could,
for lack of a better word, to get to review your motion, Councilor Medvigi, and the second, because we can't vote on this until it's separate business, if that's what you want to do. If you think it's more effective at a hearing under separate business, I'm fine to do that. But Councilor Bowerman, you brought this forward. What do you prefer?
well, obviously the sooner the better I do like, but I think the notion of taking it to a Tuesday meeting in the form as amended would be a great motion for us today, if that's appropriate.
Okay. Councilor Medvigi, would you like to change your motion to that?
I'm not clear on what,
I
would like to approve it with the amendments and then present it at one of our public hearings.
Okay, that's what we're talking about then. So the motion is to approve this as amended and hear it at the next possible hearing under separate business. And in reviewing this discussion, I believe that is the motion. It has been seconded. Is there further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to councilor reports. Moving on to work session requests.
There are no work session requests today.
Thank you. Okay, Lindsay, do you have a policy update for us?
Nothing additional today. Thank you.
Okay, and I don't think we have any executive session either. Is that true?
That is accurate.
Okay. Well, thank you all. We are adjourned. Bye-bye.